Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 1 to 4 player game, Sleeping Gods Distant Skies, designed by Ryan Lockett and published by Red Raven Games, who helped sponsor this video. Look, no one's blaming you. It's clear you didn't choose to fly into that strange portal that appeared suddenly in the sky. It's almost as if your plane was pulled through it. But now you're who knows where. In a land with strange creatures, scheming gods, and a mystery you're going to have to solve if you want to get back home. So join me at the table and let's learn how to play. To set up, put this atlas in the center of the play area, open to page 2. Every page is divided into square spaces with several numbered locations spread throughout. You'll now add this Claire Smith figure to the space numbered 6. Nearby, create a supply of the resources. The ones made up of torches, og roots, whiskey, sand honey, rope, and meat are known as the common resources. The tundra berry, blood flower, gurgon leaf, fire quartz, ice diamond, and jade worm eggs are the quest resources, and I'm organizing all of these into some trays that I have. Nearby, also set this bonus time token, these power tokens, and this die, along with a supply of the status tokens and the synergy, power, and damage markers. Now set this action board in a central area, adding this pocket watch to the top space of the time track here. Then add one meat, og root, torch, and rope resource here, where the players will keep the resources they currently have access to. This is the flight board, which you'll add to the play area, setting this plane figure onto the Henrik's camp space. Nearby, also set this plane tile with the plastic sliders set to the highest values of what are known as the plane's health and fuel tracks. Sleeping Gods Distant Skies is a campaign game, meaning you'll play out an ongoing story over several separate sessions. And to keep track of your campaign, you'll collect and use one of these journey log sheets, recording the starting date and the players' names. I'll assume we have 2 players in this video, and I've recorded their names here already. You also decide if you're going to play on easy, normal, or hard mode, and you check the related box. For this video, we're going to choose normal. Now find the 5 character boards and add the Claire Smith one to an area within reach of all the players, as she'll be shared by everyone over the course of the game. But the remaining 4 characters you distribute as evenly as possible among the players. In a 3-player game, this means someone will take 2 characters while everyone else gets 1 character each, but that's okay. For each of your characters, you'll collect a standee, and there are plastic bases included for these, but in this video, I'm just going to leave these tokens flat since I think they'll be easier to see that way. Also, add one of these damage tokens to the highest valued space on each of your character's health tracks found at their bottom, and then assign 3 of these stamina tokens to each of your characters as well. Make sure you don't forget to give 3 stamina, a health marker, and a standee to the player-shared character of Claire Smith as well. The cards with this back are events. If you're playing on easy mode, you'll use all of them. But if you're playing on normal difficulty, as we are here, go through these face up and find all the events labeled as level 1 in this area. Shuffle these and then randomly remove 8 of them, returning them to the box unseen. Or remove 14 if you're playing on hard mode. After removing any events as necessary, shuffle all the remaining events together and set them to the left of the action board. Next, find the ability cards, which have this back, and shuffle them into a face-down deck nearby, drawing 4 of them. Distribute these as evenly as possible between the players. If you're playing solo, you would just keep all of them. In this 2-player game, we give 2 to each player, and while you can always look at your own ability cards, keep them a secret from the other players. There are 3 different types of adventure cards. Any that have a number in their corner here go into this box and should be arranged in order from the lowest value to the highest. This box also contains the quest cards, which are also numbered and kept in order. Never look through any of the cards in this box unless you're instructed to. The remaining adventure cards don't have numbers, but the ones with this combat label on them are now shuffled and set face down onto the space for them of what is known as the combat deck board that you'll keep nearby. The remaining adventure cards, known as starting adventures and labeled with an S in their corner here, are now shuffled and randomly distributed to the players as evenly as possible. If you're playing solo, you keep all 6 of the starting adventure cards, but in our 2-player game, we would deal out 3 to each player. But unlike the ability cards, you don't keep your adventure cards secret from the other players.
The numbered cards with this back are the enemies. Don't shuffle or look through these, but set them face down in the play area, going from the lowest value on top all the way down to the highest. This is the Storybook. Also, don't look through this, just set it nearby. Then give this active player token to the person controlling the Azarius character.
That player will end up taking the first turn of the game. And that's the setup. In Sleeping Gods Distant Skies, you and your band of adventurers have been teleported to a strange new world. But you've come to learn that by exploring, surviving, and finding long-lost totems, you can gain the required power to return to your Earth. Now, there was another Sleeping Gods game released previously, and we have a separate tutorial for that, which is linked in the description below. But this is a completely standalone game and doesn't require the previous game in order to play. I should also mention, this comes with an introductory scenario, which we're going to skip here, but you must play through this in your first game as it gives you the start of the campaign's story. Now, this is a campaign game. However, you can play for as long as you like in one sitting and then save the game to resume later. You can also have players join or leave along the way, or even play solo. Sleeping Gods Distant Skies is played over a series of turns, starting with the active player and going clockwise around and around the table until the campaign ends. If you hold the active player token, then you're the active player, and you'll perform the 4 steps of a turn, starting with drawing 2 ability cards.
Here, the active player takes 2 ability cards from the top of the deck to add to their hand. If you ever have more than 7 ability cards, pick some to put into this shared discard pile until you're back down to 7. And if this deck ever runs out when you would need more, reshuffle the discard pile into a new deck to draw from.
If there's no ability discard pile to reshuffle, then every player must discard all their ability cards, except one, to be shuffled into a new deck. Abilities you have in hand must be kept secret from the other players, but as we'll see later, they can be used to help the characters during the game. Also, at any time, even during another action or another player's turn, you can equip abilities you have to characters you control.
The characters you control are the ones you were assigned during the setup. These 2 in my case. And when you're the active player, as we'll say I am, you also control Claire Smith. When it's another player's turn, they'll become the active player and control their assigned characters and Claire Smith, and I'll go back to just controlling these 2.
The reason I mention this is because I said you can equip ability cards to any character you control. So as the active player, I could also assign them to Claire Smith. To equip an ability card, pay the cost shown in its top right-hand corner, which represents the number of other ability cards you must discard from your hand. So to equip this defend ability, you discard 2 other abilities to a shared discard pile.
You then slide the equipped ability under a character you control, and this will provide them with the skill symbol it shows in this area. There are 6 different types of skills in the game, represented by 6 different symbols: strength, cunning, savvy, perception, moxie, and craft. We'll see how ability cards are used later, but just know a character can have at most 8 of them equipped. But you can discard abilities from a character you control at any time. Also be aware, when paying the cost to equip a new ability, you must discard an extra ability card from your hand for each one already equipped to your character with a matching skill symbol. So to equip this ability, which has a matching skill symbol to one I already have equipped, I'd have to discard 1, 2, 3 cards.
In addition to providing skill symbols, equipped abilities also provide your character with an effect shown in this area. Many, like this one, will resolve any time the effect would apply.
Others, like this one, have a cost shown to the left of an arrow. This is the symbol for a stamina token, so it means you can spend 1 stamina from the character to gain 1 torch resource. When you spend stamina, just set it to the side of your character board. When you gain a resource, move it from the supply to this shared resource area where it will be available for all players to use.
Resources are limited, so if an effect provides you with one and there aren't any left in the supply, just ignore that effect. With that, we've covered the first step of the active player's turn, drawing 2 ability cards. But remember, you can equip abilities at any time, including during another player's turn. Now though, let's move to the second step of the active player's turn, called events.
Here, the active player draws the top card of this event deck and reads it out loud.
Events can't be ignored, and if they cause any negative effects, the active player decides how to distribute them among any of the characters, which can include characters they don't personally control.
This symbol on the left represents damage, 3 in this case. Now again, the active player can assign all 3 damage to a single character or divide it up in any way they like. Anytime a character takes damage, move their health marker to the left for each point of damage taken. If a player's health is ever reduced to 0, they're in a weakened state, and we'll learn the effect of that a little bit later. During the game, you may have to resolve a symbol like this, which represents a type of status known as venom. Status on events, just like damage, are assigned to characters by the active player. When a player gains a status, place the related token on their board, and there are 5 different types: venom, frightened, weakened, madness, and low morale. Each character can end up with any number of status tokens, but never more than 1 of each type. For example, if another effect would cause this character to gain a venom token, when they already have a venom token, then you would just ignore that effect. We won't go through each of the statuses because how they work is printed on their tokens, but you can also refer to this page of the rulebook for more detail if you have questions on them while playing. Either way, after resolving an event, set it into the discard area for it here. And if the event deck is ever empty when you need to draw a new one, just reshuffle the discard pile into a new deck. That said, some events present you with a challenge you must immediately attempt. Challenges will show a skill symbol and a value. Throughout the game, you'll face and attempt challenges, so let's take a moment to learn how to complete them, and then we'll come back and finish learning the event step of a turn. Again, anytime a challenge is presented, it will show you a skill you must test, strength in this case, and a value you must reach or exceed. So here, 8. The first step of a challenge is for the active player to decide which of the characters they control they want to have participate in the challenge. Other players can also have any number of their characters assist in the challenge if they want to. However, every character that participates in the challenge must spend 1 stamina, removing it from their board. If they don't have the stamina to spend, they can't participate. You then combine the related skill value of each participating character. That value is the number of skill symbols on their character board and equipped ability cards. In this case, we're testing strength, and we'll assume it's later in the game, and these 2 characters participate, contributing 1, 2, 3, 4 points. Just be aware, you can save your stamina and have none of the characters actively participate. Your total will be 0 so far, but either way, you then draw fate by flipping over the top card of the ability deck, ignoring everything on it except the fate number, which is shown in the top left-hand corner. Add this to your current total. We had 4, and this adds 3 more for a total of 7. Now any player can use adventure cards and/or character and equipped abilities, even for characters who didn't spend stamina to initially participate in the challenge. Character abilities are shown in this area, and as an example, Ed has one here that lets him spend a stamina to gain either a strength or cunning skill point. You can activate any abilities on characters you control anytime, as often as you like, as long as you pay the stamina costs. In a similar way, players can use the effect of equipped abilities on characters they control anytime it would apply, as long as they can satisfy its requirements. For example, once per challenge, this character can spend a stamina to add 1 fate to the current total. Don't forget, players were also dealt adventure cards, and you can play these during a challenge or any time they would apply during any player's turn. For example, during this challenge, we might play this. When you see slashes, they divide separate abilities, and you must pick only one. For example, the effect on the left means you may draw a new ability card using its fate value over the original one. After you play and resolve an adventure card, put it into the discard area for it here on the action board. The last way you can boost your total value in a challenge is to discard any number of ability cards still in your hand. And any number of players can do this, whether they paid stamina to have characters participate in the challenge initially or not. Each ability discarded, showing the skill symbol being tested in this area, adds +1 to your final result. Let's assume after boosting our value as much as we could or wanted to, we had a final total of 9. Remember, our required value was 8 or higher, so we succeeded. This means we ignore any fail consequences and claim any gain consequences. In this case, we earn an aug-root resource. Now, if you fail, then you resolve any listed fail consequences, where here it means we would suffer 8 damage.
When a challenge consequence includes damage, the active player distributes it, as they like, among the characters who spent stamina to initially participate in the challenge. If those characters all run out of health to lose, then they would assign any extra damage as they like to the characters who didn't participate in the challenge. That said, even if you fail, after resolving the negative effect, you still collect any gain reward. So again, we would collect an augroot resource in this case. And that covers resolving challenges. We'll see some more examples of when you might encounter challenges, but this time we saw one when resolving an event. So let's go back and look at a few other types of events we might encounter. Some will have a "this remains in play" bar, like we see here. If so, set the event face up beside the atlas. Any ongoing effect, like we see here, will resolve anytime its conditions are met. You can have several active events at the same time, and some will have turn-end effects, like this one, which resolve at the end of each player's turn. Notice that the bar on these say, "This remains in play until you do something." In both these cases, we see challenges. On their turn, a player can attempt to resolve any event challenge following the challenge instructions that we learned earlier and resolving the success or failure effect shown. But whether they succeed or not, the related event is then discarded. As a final example, I should point out that some events will instruct you to add threat, as we see here. This means you just add a damage token to them, and this can cause further effects to trigger. But if so, that will be explained on the card itself. The last thing I'll just mention here is that if the event deck ever runs out when you need to draw a new one, shuffle its discard pile into a new deck. All right, with that understood, we've covered the event step of a turn, and now it's time for the action step. Here, the active player may perform actions from the 5 types listed at the bottom of the action board as many times as they like, as long as they can pay for them. All of the actions except for camping cost time, represented by the symbol here. So to explore, we'd spend 2 time. Anytime you spend time, move the marker here down the track that number of spaces. You can't spend time past the bottom of the track. However, you must continue to take actions until you reach at least this space. From here, you can perform one more action that would cost 1 time, or pass. If you pass, your action step ends, but you give this bonus time token, representing the time you didn't spend, to the next player in clockwise order. When they get to the action step of their turn, they'll spend this bonus time token in the cost of their first action, ultimately giving them extra time for actions during their turn. With that understood, let's go through all the different actions, starting with camping. This action doesn't cost any time. Instead, the symbol here at the top means you must cross off a camp symbol. You'll find these on your journey log sheet, and they're crossed off from left to right. You can think of this as the timer for your campaign. As soon as anything causes you to mark off either of these 2 campfires, you follow the instructions related to the symbols found above them here at the bottom. As I mentioned, the campfires on the journey log act as a type of timer for your campaign, so you'll want to preserve these as much as possible. However, camping can provide you with several benefits, as we'll see. Just know you can camp anywhere and at any time, as long as you're not in the middle of another action, because an action can never interrupt another action. When you camp, each character regains stamina tokens to their maximum of 3 each and restores 2 health. You also pick any 1 character and remove 1 status token from them. Then, as it says here at the bottom, refresh the adventure cards by collecting any in the adventure discard pile. The active player shuffles these, dealing them to the players 1 at a time, starting with themselves until they run out. But there's no limit to how many adventure cards a player can have over the course of the game, and certain situations during the game will provide you with new ones. When the game instructs you to gain a new adventure, it will provide a number. Go through the adventure cards in the box until you find the related card and collect it. Some adventure cards you collect during the game will show this symbol, meaning this card represents a totem. As you'll learn after completing the introduction of the campaign, your mission during the game will be to rescue lost passengers and find and rejuvenate totems like this one, which you'll learn how to do in detail as you play. Either way, that covers the camp action, so now let's learn the travel action, which costs 1 time. When you travel, you move the Claire Smith figure, representing your party of characters, from the space it's in to an adjacent space, going up or down, left or right.
You can't move diagonally, but know that spaces on either side of the spiral binding are still considered adjacent for the purposes of travel. If the space you enter is marked with a diamond symbol like this, it represents an obstacle. And there are 3 different types. This represents treacherous water, this is steep terrain, and here we have cold. Entering a space with an obstacle costs you 3 health, as it shows here, divided among any characters as you like. However, if any of the characters have an adventure card or an equipped ability or some other effect that allows an obstacle to be ignored, they can use it and then the party takes no damage from the obstacle. If you're on a space at the edge of the map and want to go off it, you can, as long as there's a numbered icon like this along that side of the page. We don't see one down here, so we couldn't travel past this edge, but we could travel in this direction. To do this, first remove Claire from the map, and then turn to the indicated page in the atlas, 10 in this case. Then add Claire to the opposite side from where you left from in what would be the equivalent space. We left from this space at the top of the previous page, so we'd enter on this space at the bottom of the new one. If the space you move into on the new page has an obstacle, don't forget to either resolve an effect that would ignore it, or suffer 3 damage. And that covers the travel action, but I'll point out your journey log has a full map of the area you're in that you can examine at any time. And this shows the pages of the atlas you start on and all the other pages of the atlas as well. And feel free to mark this map with any notes about the areas you explore. They could come in handy later. Okay, now let's learn the Explore action, which costs 2 time to perform. You can only take this action if Claire is on a space with 1 or more of these numbered locations. These are specific points of interest, which you'll also find indicated on your map as well. To resolve the Explore action, turn to the related numbered paragraph in the storybook. 6 in this case. Now I want to mention the storybook contains spoilers, and every page contains several numbered paragraphs. When opening the storybook, only examine the section you're instructed to. For the purposes of this video, I'll show you some of the paragraphs, but none that will spoil anything significant, just enough to teach you the important concepts you need to understand. When you open to a section of story, read it aloud and you'll eventually reach a few possible situations. Here, you're given 3 options. Picking either of these first 2 require you to turn to new sections and read them, but only after you've made your choice. You can't read ahead. Every Explore action eventually provides an option to return to the map. Resolving that will end the action, and then you can put the storybook away until it's needed again. Sometimes a result will instruct you to gain a numbered quest. When this happens, open the card box and find the quest with that number on it and collect it. Quests should be set face up in a common area and will have a hint about how to complete them and possibly other information. Many will also include a keyword at the top. When you turn to a storybook section, some will ask if you already have a particular keyword. This means having it displayed on any of your face-up quests. In this case, if we had the Merc keyword, we could choose to turn to section 1.3 if we wanted to. However, if we have the Summon keyword, it says we must turn to 1.5. When you have more than 1 keyword option, as listed here, go through them in order from top to bottom. Sometimes you'll be told to lose or complete a quest, and if so, you add the indicated quest to this completed quest box. Once in here, the quest can't be taken from the box again, unless, of course, you're resetting the game to begin a brand new campaign. Also be aware that some storybook sections will propose a challenge, in this case, Strength 12, which you resolve just as we learned about before. If you fail, you resolve the listed fail outcome, but then, unless told otherwise, continue reading and resolve the next step, in this case, turning to section 4.5. If you pass this challenge, ignore the fail outcome, and then just turn to section 4.5. Sometimes a story section will initiate combat and list a series of numbers like we see here. This means you're about to encounter enemies that you must fight before you can continue the story. Now, to avoid spoilers, I'll teach combat by setting up a fictional encounter. Let's assume the combat had been written as Combat 1-12. We start by going through the backs of the cards in this enemy card deck and taking out those numbers. Then shuffle and randomly place them face up, side by side with no spaces between them. Next, check each card for what are known as these blue power symbols. Total the values inside of them, which will create each enemy's starting power. Our Ghastly Stalker begins with 1, 2, 3, and our Harkian Warrior starts with just 1. You then place the related number of these power tokens taken from the supply onto each card. Now players shuffle their combat deck. There should be 14 cards total, and if any are in the discard pile from the previous combat, make sure to collect and shuffle those in too. Every player now draws a single combat card each, and then one more for each character they control, not counting Claire. So in this 2-player game, each player would gain 1, and then draw 2 more for each of their 2 characters. Then it's time to start resolving what are known as combat rounds, and you'll continue performing these until either all the enemies are defeated or all the characters have been reduced to 0 health. During a combat round in any order, players may play, at most, exactly 1 combat card from their hand onto each character they control, not counting Claire Smith. However, the player controlling Claire Smith may choose to play a combat card on Claire instead of one of their other characters. In this way, every character will be assigned a card except Claire, unless that controlling player decides to put a card on Claire instead of one of their other characters. Another way to think of it is that no more than 4 cards total will be played during the combat round, but players can also choose to play fewer if they want. And remember, cards can be played in any order. I could go first, or my partner could. Maybe I'll go first. I'll assign a card to one of my characters. I could go again, or maybe my partner would go and assign a card to one of their characters, and then maybe another card to their other character, and then I'd go with the 4th and final card. Just keep in mind, you can't play a card on a character who has no health, or who was already assigned one this combat round. That said, let's actually assign a card and see how this works. Let's assume I played this pistol on Miguel. After playing a card, you must choose an enemy card to be the target of the attack. I'll choose the Ghastly Stalker. You now resolve the combat card's effects, which will be shown in this area of the card you played. If you have multiple effects, like this, then resolve them in any order. Here we have the symbol for dealing damage, so 4 in this case, but a plus with this die symbol means we roll this combat die and add that much damage to the total. This has values from -1 to 3, and we'll assume we rolled the 3 for a total of 7. The effect on this card creates 2 damage plus the related character's total perception skill from their board and any equipped abilities. Unlike during challenges, you can't discard ability cards to boost your damage during combat. Once you have your total damage, you'll assign it to your target, picking any one square to start from and distributing that damage in tokens over squares adjacent to one another, going up, down, left or right, but not diagonally. Each square takes exactly 1 damage to fill unless it shows a heart symbol. In that case, to place a damage there, you must spend that many points of damage. Let's say I decide to put my first point of damage here. I can now add damage to other adjacent spaces, but again, not diagonally. If I want to add a token to this spot, it actually costs 4. So I add 1 of my hearts here, and then 3 of them I'll return to the supply. Now I can keep assigning damage to any spaces adjacent to any damage I assigned so far during this attack. But I couldn't assign 1 here because that would cost 3 hearts and I only have 2 left. Maybe I'll add 1 here instead. We'll learn the benefit of covering spaces in a moment, but if you cover one that is showing what is known as a synergy symbol in its top corner, take one of these synergy tokens and assign it to any character other than the one that's currently attacking. We'll see the benefit of synergy tokens in a moment, but a character can end up with any number of them, though you're limited to the ones that come in the game. If you run out when you need to place a new one, feel free to take one back from another character to place on a different one. As long as you continue placing damage adjacent to other damage added during the same attack, you can even go into an adjacent space on another enemy's card like this. This is known as splash damage, but you must ensure that at least half the damage from this attack rounded up is assigned to your original target. So you may be wondering, what's the benefit of assigning damage to an enemy? Great question. Once a space has a damage token on it, any effect there is ignored for the rest of combat. And since these effects benefit the enemy, covering them up is a good idea, as we'll see. After your combat card effects have been resolved, the enemy you targeted immediately counterattacks, dealing damage equal to its basic attack value here, plus the number of power tokens it currently has. You don't count the power symbols that are down here. If you caused splash damage to another enemy, only the original target counterattacks. So this will cause 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 damage, which is given to the character who performed the attack. Sometimes symbols on your combat card can benefit you during a counterattack. For example, if we had played this card instead, we'd have only dealt 1 damage, but this symbol means we remove a power token from the enemy. And this is a shield symbol that blocks that much damage during the counterattack. But we didn't play this card, so we take 5 damage instead. If you run out of health during a counterattack, any additional damage you should have received is just ignored. After, and only after, the counterattack, check to see if every heart symbol on any of the enemy cards are covered. If so, that enemy is defeated and returned to the enemy deck. If you're facing more than 2 enemies, and one in a middle position is removed, just slide the remaining enemies together. So just to be clear, you don't have to cover every space on an enemy's card to defeat it, just the spaces showing red heart symbols. However, you might find it helpful to cover other spaces if you can't defeat an enemy outright. Also be aware that even if you cover all of an enemy's heart spaces, it will still counterattack. Only after its counterattack is a defeated card removed. So again, during a combat round, characters are dealt a combat card, resolving an attack and counterattack until 4 combat cards have been played. Though you can play fewer if you like, or you might have to, since characters with 0 health can't be assigned a combat card. Either way, at that point, it's time for the end of the combat round. First, players discard all combat cards they played on characters, adding them to this combat discard pile. Each remaining enemy now gains power tokens equal to the exposed power bonus symbols on their cards. So just 1 for this enemy and none for this one. And be aware if you ever run out of power tokens in the supply, use these bonus tokens as a substitute for 5 individual tokens, or just use a suitable replacement. All remaining enemies now resolve their end-of-round abilities. These are any showing a sand timer symbol. For example, this effect deals 4 damage to any one character. This gives a character a madness status, and this means you must assign 1 power to any other enemy still in the fight. Now, as usual, if a damage token is covering an end-of-round effect, then that effect is ignored. And keep in mind, the active player decides which characters are affected by enemy abilities. After the end-of-round enemy effects have been resolved, if any, check to see if any enemies remain. If so, every player draws a new combat card to replace each one they had played previously. So in this 2-player game, each player would gain 2 new cards. Then you start a new round of combat. If the combat deck runs out when you would need to draw more, just shuffle its discard pile into a new draw deck. Either way, you then begin assigning combat cards, attacking and counterattacking as before. Now I should mention, we're not going to go over every symbol and enemy effect you might come across in the game, but enemy abilities are all described on this page of the rulebook if you have questions while playing, and you'll find an index of the game's icons on the back of the rulebook as well. That said, I should explain this area of a combat card known as its synergy effect. This part of the card is ignored unless you assign the combat card to a character who was given a synergy token previously. If so, you can spend 1 to gain the synergy effect in addition to its regular combat effects. Along with combat cards, don't forget players may also have regular adventure cards in hand, and these, as usual, can always be played anytime their effects might apply. For example, this one lets you re-roll the combat die. However, while in combat, you can't play adventure cards labeled as recipes, like we see here, or any that would move the Claire figure on the atlas, or that would move the plane. I should also make one other thing clear. Although all damage from an attack must be assigned to adjacent spaces, when the next character attacks, they can put their first damage anywhere. It doesn't have to be placed adjacent to a previous attack. They just have to ensure that all of their damage is assigned to spaces adjacent to damage they assigned during their current attack. And that covers the rules for combat rounds. If at the end of a combat round, all enemies have been defeated, players discard all remaining combat cards they're holding to the combat discard pile and remove any leftover synergy tokens on characters. You then continue with the next steps in the storybook. Now, as we learned, during the game, you might be instructed to gain new adventure cards from this box. Sometimes these will be new combat adventure cards, like this one, as indicated by the label in its corner. As you gain new combat adventure cards, you can add them to your current deck, but if you like, you can also go through and set aside any of them, placing them here, as long as you keep at least 14 in what is known as the active combat deck. You might do this to set aside weaker ones while keeping stronger ones in. And anytime outside of combat, you can make adjustments, putting cards back in, taking others out, as you like. And players can make these decisions together, but it's the active player who has the final say. And you can even make adjustments after the enemies for a combat encounter have been revealed, but that's your last chance to make adjustments until the combat is over. There is one more combat-related rule you should be aware of. Sometimes you'll be instructed to fight a boss, and instead of dealing out enemy cards, you'll flip to an entire page in the storybook. All combat rules with bosses mostly remain the same, but each boss is divided into 3 or 4 zones by lines, like we see here. You treat each zone like individual cards, so when you attack, you pick a zone as a target, but can still cause splash damage into adjacent zone spaces. The zone that was targeted then counterattacks using the information here. Now, once you've covered all of the hearts within a zone, that zone is not defeated. All uncovered abilities in that zone still apply until all hearts on the entire boss have been covered, which will defeat the boss. And that covers all the rules we need to know for combat. And remember, we got into discussing combat when describing the Explore action, which lets you turn to the related page in the storybook based on the numbered location of a space that you're in. However, sometimes when you turn to a section of the storybook, you'll find a full illustration. This is known as a wandering encounter. Each player now takes their character's standees, or just these tokens, since I'm not using the bases right now, and assigns them to what are known as the various actions there. But players can choose not to assign all of their characters if they don't want to. Players can discuss where they want to go, but each action can only be performed once, though up to 2 characters can be assigned to each action, which might be useful if you want help completing a challenge there. If an action includes a challenge, it's resolved in the usual way, but only the characters there can spend stamina to contribute their skill symbols, or choose not to and just skip right to drawing fate. If the reward of a wandering encounter is a quest, the player or players at that spot can gain and read it privately, sharing what happened to the group in their own words. You can think of it as role-playing the fact that they wandered off to experience this privately. Of course, if you prefer, you can also set the quest face up and let everyone see it. I should also mention, unless an effect says otherwise, you can end a wandering encounter early if you want to. Either way, once all of the assigned actions have been completed, or players have chosen just to end them, the standees are taken back. The last thing I'll mention before moving on is that this symbol on various atlas spaces will be explained as you play. You can just ignore it for now. Otherwise, that covers the Explore action, so now let's discuss the Fly action. To perform this, we first need to understand the flight board. This shows you the current location of the plane. In this case, it's at Henrik's camp, which, as we're shown here, is on page 2 of the atlas. The plane is always considered to be located at the landing place icon shown on that page, which looks like this. So even if we move Claire to another page, the plane is still at Henrik's camp on the landing place of page 2. That said, if Claire is on the same landing place as the plane figure's current location, and if the flight tile shows the plane with at least 1 health and 1 fuel, you can perform the Fly action. As shown here, it will cost you 2 time, and you must spend 1 fuel moving the slider accordingly. You may then move the plane to any space of the flight board. Let's say we move it to the Northern Sea. You then check the page value, 14 in this case, turning to that page of the atlas and setting the Claire figure onto the same space as the landing place icon shown there. After a flight, you count how many spaces you traveled on the flight board. 1, 2 in this case. You then draw a fate and add the value here. Check the total against this chart on the plane tile, taking damage based on the outcome. Our total was 6, so we'd take 1 damage. If the plane ever reaches 0 health, it cannot fly. And if it would take any amount of damage while at 0 health, you must cross off a camp symbol on your journey log. If you ever hit 0 fuel, gain Quest 206 as it shows here. If the plane is currently on the Geyser space of the flight board, as you're reminded here, you can at any time pay any 2 resources to move the plane's fuel marker back up to 5. And you can do this no matter where the Claire figure is on the atlas, even if it's on a different page. This space of the flight board is unique. It's called a discovered location known as Sapphire Pass. The rules also refer to this as a distant location. When you fly here, you move the Claire figure to this space as well. This is because distant locations like Sapphire Pass aren't found in the atlas. You can think of it as its own unique location. Performing an explore action here opens this Storybook section. You can also fly from here back to any of the other locations, returning Claire to the related page's landing space in the atlas. During the game, you may find distant location cards which you add to this area and can fly to as well. All distant locations are considered adjacent to the Sapphire Pass when counting distance traveled and rolling for potential damage. If you want to fly from one distant location to another distant location, they're all considered one flight distance away from each other. As a further example, if you're on one of these locations and wanted to fly to here, you always go through Sapphire Pass first. So that's a flight distance of 1, 2, 3. All right, this brings us to the last action, repair. To perform this action, Claire must be on the landing space for the page of the atlas the plane is currently on. Then, as it shows here, you spend 1 time and perform a craft challenge, which is resolved as usual, but your final total is checked against this chart to determine the result. For example, if our final total was 9, we'd restore 2 health to the plane, adjusting the slider appropriately. And those are all the actions. However, there are some other things you can do on your turn. For example, if a character has 0 health, they're weakened. They can still walk and talk for the purposes of moving around the map and interacting in the storybook, but they can't be assigned any more damage. They can't assist in skill challenges, participate in combat, or activate any other abilities until they have at least 1 health. And you will find ways that you can restore a character's health. For example, playing this first aid kit restores 2 health, and you can divide this up among players any way you like. However, if you assign some or all of this to a player with 0 health, as it shows here, to go from 0 to 1 health also costs 1 time. So if I assign both of these health points to this character, I first have to spend 1 time, and then I'd advance the marker like this. Before moving on, there's a specific adventure card I think we should discuss. This Eugene Coleman card has 2 effects. When you play it for the left effect, you pay 1 fuel and move the plane. What's unique is that it doesn't cost any time, and the Claire figure doesn't have to be on the plane's landing space. Eugene is the plane's official pilot, and thematically, you should think of him as always being in the plane, even when the other characters are wandering the atlas. Playing this card allows you to cause him to fly the plane. If the Claire figure happens to be in the plane's current location, Claire can fly the plane as usual, moving to the new page. But let's consider a slightly different situation instead. Let's say we were on this page where the plane is located, but then we traveled with the Claire figure off of this page onto a new one. If we then went to the plane's location for this page, we can't get in the plane because the plane's not here. It's back in the location we left it in. But we could play Eugene's card and have him fly the plane to this location following his card's instructions. In this way, even if the party gets quite far from where the plane is currently located, you can then use Eugene's card to fly to your current location rather than having to run all the way back to where you'd left the plane. Very handy. The next thing we should discuss are resources. As we saw, when you gain resources, you add them to the action board where they can be used as required by the group. For example, a person playing this Stew adventure card could spend a meat and og root, returning them to the supply in order to distribute 6 health and 1 stamina token among the characters. However, every resource can be discarded for its own unique benefit, which the symbols on it will remind you of. You can discard Root to restore 1 health, Whiskey removes a frightened or low morale status, and the Torch deals 1 damage. The interesting thing about the Torch's damage is that the rules explain it is not an attack. This means when you're in combat, if you spent a Torch to deal 1 damage to the enemy would not counterattack in response. So anytime an effect causes damage, but is described as not an attack, deal the damage, but don't resolve a counterattack. Going back to resources, if you discard a Sand Honey token, it can either restore 1 health or remove 1 weakened status. Rope can either ignore steep terrain or remove 1 power, and Meat returns 1 stamina to a character. All of these are known as common resources. There are also 6 types of quest resources. Tundra berries restore 8 health, blood flowers restore 10, a Gurgon leaf adds 8 to a fate total, fire quartz deals 7 damage, and ice diamonds deal 8, but neither are considered an attack, so again, they don't create a counterattack. Finally, jade worm eggs restore 5 stamina. Although quest resources are more powerful, you may not want to discard them for their effects because they're also used to restore totems that you'll find on your adventures. For example, this quest says that if you trade in these quest resources, you'll rejuvenate one of the totems. Just be aware, quest resources are ranked from highest value to lowest value here, and you can always use a higher quest resource in place of a required lower one when restoring a totem. Although you'll learn a lot about the game's objectives while playing, restoring totems is one of the main goals. All right, with that, we've covered what you can do during the action step of a turn. Remember, after the time token advances to here, you may pass, and if so, the next player gains this extra time token to spend on their turn. Or you can use your remaining time on another action yourself. In either case, afterwards, the active player's turn ends. Now check for any end-of-turn effects on active event cards, and then return the pocket watch to the top space, passing the active player token clockwise. That player now controls the Claire Smith character board and starts their turn with step 1, drawing 2 ability cards. And that's how turns are completed. And you'll continue taking turns trying to find lost passengers, survive the world, and rejuvenate totems. How will you know if you've won? Well, I can't really say, as that would spoil things. If you win, the game will tell you. However, I can say that you're defeated if all 5 characters have 0 health at the same time, but even then, the game isn't over. If you're defeated while exploring, close the storybook, go back to the map, and restore all characters to full health, regain all stamina, and remove all status effects. Then cross off 3 camps and mark one of these defeat boxes on your journey log. Keep in mind, if marking 3 camps causes you to cross off both of these camp symbols, resolve their related storybook entries here, one after the other. If you're instead defeated during what is known as an end story, which begins in the storybook starting at section 120, mark 1 defeat on the journey log, restore characters to full health, regain all stamina, and remove all statuses, then read from the beginning of section 120 again, repeating this until you finish the game. And you'll know you're finished when the game tells you you are. I want to point out the rulebook provides some ways to adjust the difficulty of the campaign, and you can even make adjustments as you play. There's an instant death mode and tips on how to survive. You'll also find some guidance on understanding your journey log and how to save the game. This page covers setting up a game you've saved and how you can add and remove players during the campaign. Finally, you'll learn here how to score your campaign, gain achievements, which are marked on this sheet, and how to reset for a new campaign, along with a variant rule for the fly action. But all of those rules I'll leave for you to discover on your own. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Sleeping Gods Distant Skies. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below, and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time, thanks for watching.